I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music, the best kept secret in music reviews. We are in the midst of a throwback set, which means this is the time of year where we have the opportunity to go back and find records that just deserve a review. Because either they're good records, change music somehow, or just Tom and I have an interest, or maybe even you guys have an interest, have given us a number of requests for a particular album, and then Tom and I decide it is time. We must review this album. Such is the case with the album of choice for today's review, which is Hole's Live Through This.
Yes.
This is their second album. Now, Tom, you know a little bit about Hole. Well, that came out wrong. But really, you know a lot about a lot of things. What do you know about Hole?
You're setting me up now.
I totally am.
Oh, I know a lot about Hole. No.
Tell me more.
So they're a West Coast band.
LA?
Yeah, yes, and fronted by Courtney Love, famously. A lot of people know her as the wife of Kurt Cobain at the time of Kurt Cobain's passing.
She did other things.
She did, yes. She was a person of herself. What do you know? Surprise, surprise. Yeah, it's a little bit hypocritical of me to poke fun because obviously that's one of the first things I mentioned. But it's worth mentioning in the context of this album simply because it came out like 4 days after Kurt Cobain passed away. And also you have to think about, the whole West Coast grunge scene at the time of the early and mid 90s. And there were some inevitable comparisons between bands just in their overall style and attitude. So, this
album in particular, I think that there's some rumors going around that Kurt Cobain played a pretty heavy role in helping either ghostwrite some of the songs, none of which was ever confirmed and we don't know.
But, and that's interesting for speculation.
Right.
It really is. But at the same time, we can't make any assumptions, so we're just moving forward to talk about the music itself. And this being Hole's second album, we just recently reviewed Doolittle, and you had noted some kind of important comparisons, really, between the two. As being sophomore albums, as them both being albums where the bands were kind of moving in a slightly poppier, or I would say more radio-friendly direction, but at the same time trying to resist that a little bit and maintain their roots.
And curiously, Love was the one, I think, pushing Hole into a poppier direction here, whereas in our previous album, Doolittle, that we just reviewed, it was the producer over the band themselves. So this album actually offers a really interesting perspective. But you can say that they went poppier, but the second you put this album on, the second that you press play on Live Through This, you hear track one, Violet, burst onto this scene, and you hear Courtney Love's vocals, and then she just starts shrieking, and from that moment you know that this is a rock album. She comes out and makes a thesis statement. The guitars go wild, the drums are crazy. What a statement to start the record.
And Courtney Love definitely, she keeps the identity of the band.
She does.
And as a female vocalist, you've got songs on here like Jennifer's Body and Doll Parts, and the way that she's presenting the lyrics and these themes that go along with the music really only could have been presented by a female vocalist. Now at the same time, grunge as a whole, whether it's a male vocalist, a female vocalist, whatever, and not just grunge, but really like alternative rock music from the mid-'80s to the mid-'90s in particular, I would say that a lot of the weight of whether you like the band or not falls on the vocalist. And that's going from anything like The Smiths and R.E.M., to Pixies, to, bands like Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, Eddie Vedder. We all have friends who hate Pearl Jam only because they can't get past Eddie Vedder's voice. We all do.
I'm not one of those people.
Same thing with Smashing Pumpkins. Yeah, same here. I'm not a huge Eddie Vedder fan,
I'm actually
but I like
not a huge Pumpkins fan because of Billy Corgan's vocals. Now, there's certain albums that I have to recognize are fantastic, but it certainly plays a role.
Exactly. My point with that is that Hole is no different. And I think whether you dig Courtney Love's vocals, her lyrics, her presentation, or overall demeanor is going to play a big part to whether you like this album or not, because I think that instrumentally and from a songwriting perspective, there is little to complain about. This album is full of energy, it's full of great riffs, it's full of great dynamics.
Good melodies, honestly.
Absolutely. So it's really just the general timbre of Courtney Love's vocals and whether you can get into them or not. Now, I think another thing that's worth addressing is that, and I don't agree with this, but I'm just saying it as a fact, I think the fact that she is a female is a little bit of a barrier to entry for some people. Well, and I think that's a shame.
If this were indie pop, everyone would love her for it. But the fact is that this is grunge. But what impresses me about Live Through This in Hole as a band is just Courtney Love's her vocals are not vocals to be trifled with. Her vocal performance is mind-blowing. Like, her range is all over the place, but what's crazy is the intensity she can pack into every line. I mean, she can go from nothing to a ton of just intense volume coming from her lungs. Like, a lot of vocalists can't do that. Male, female, mix, they can't do that. And that's something that you have to respect if you're just a fan of music, is a vocalist who can add that dynamic contrast. And it's so important in grunge music. It's so important that they add that dynamic contrast to separate, the verses from the choruses, to bring the listener in, to hook you in and make you listen harder to what the lyrics are. I mean, lyrics are a huge deal on this album. I mean, Courtney Love's exploring all sorts of subjects, especially those, that cater to like women's rights and things that happen to the ladies.
Yeah, and I think that is what makes it a little bit difficult for some people at first, but I find that when you listen to this album enough, where maybe at the start some people will have an attitude of, who's this angry woman and why is she screaming at me? Once you get to know the more subtle parts of the album and you listen to the lyrics and you understand them, I think that it's hard not to fall in love with and hard not to respect. Respect more than anything, whether you like the audio aesthetic of it or not. I think that you have to respect it because there's an authenticity driving it that's hard to ignore. At the same time, whether you connect with it or not, that's where it gets to be a little bit more niche, and I think that's where some people have problems. And even myself, admittedly, a little bit more. I'm sure if I was in a certain demographic at the time this actually came out, I may have had a different experience. But regardless of the context, this is still a very good album.
And I think it's gone down in history as that. I mean, when I listen to this, the first thing that jumps out at me is just the quality vocal presentation and dynamics and the songwriting. The second is just there are a ton of just sweet riffs by Eric Erlandson and just what he's able to do on guitar and what Courtney Love is able to do vocally. I mean, it's a match made in heaven, right? And the only thing that I have to say, that could possibly go against this album, and these are just minor criticisms of that, is that there's just certain tracks are up here and some are down here. And I think that in general, the front half of this album is very strong. Tracks like Violet, Plump, Jennifer's Body, Doll Parts, and really, I mean, I don't think it even comes down a step until like tracks 8 or 9, Softer, Softest, and She Walks on Me. I mean, those are still really good tracks. They're just not quite the caliber, that they're just not quite as memorable. I did find myself liking every single track on this album. I didn't think that it closed particularly strong, but at the same time, it wasn't a weak close either. But it did bring it down from like the upper 90s to a 100.
I totally agree. And this is an album that actually surprised me because I liked it a little bit more than I thought it would. It reminded me a bit of, there's a band from the early 80s called X out of Los Angeles as well, that kind of similar punk feel, guy and girl dynamic, and they're a wonderful band. I would recommend checking them out if you like Hole. So that whole genre, I think it's really cool, how...
The whole genre?
Oh my God. Oh, why did I say Hole, W-H-O-L-E? I just fell right into that one.
You fell into that hole?
You've been waiting for me to do that.
I've been waiting this whole review.
I just knew it. But
gotta get my dad jokes ready.
Yeah, you got to. But I think, in the context of 1994, I think this was still good timing. It brought back some of those elements of 70s and 80s classic punk and just repackaged them with solid songwriting for the 90s grunge generation.
And another thing that really impressed me about Live Through This is just the fact that there's a good variety. Similar to Doolittle, which we just reviewed.
Yeah.
I mean, similar to Doolittle, you have a lot of songs here. They show that they can tackle heavier tracks, poppier tracks. Doll Parts is really a ballad. It does, rock out towards the end there, but I mean, it's a very good song, and it's enjoyable. And I think that just the diversity that they show, the craft that they show in being able to sculpt an album that is a good straight through listen. I mean, that you have to give props where props are due, and Hole deserves props for Live Through This.
I have no complaints from stylistic standpoints, from performance standpoints. What it really comes down to for me, and kind of deciding on my score, is just how much I love the tracks. And some of them I really love, and some of them I'm kind of So that minor track displacement is what makes me put this at an 89. I think this is very good, but I could have liked it a little more still.
And I'm right there with you. And I think historical context factored in, which we try to factor out for our reviews. We review these older albums as if they were coming out today. Historical context applied, what this did for music. Clearly, that adds a factor to it. And this would be a perfect 100. But really, from where we're at, 89 sounds about right.
Yeah.
Now, what did you guys think about Live Through This? What's your favorite whole record? And I mean, what is really your favorite grunge band? Because as Tom brought up, you named a number of artists earlier, and obviously we have our own, favorites out of those artists you listed. I'm really curious as to what you guys think about the grunge genre and what was your favorite act. Let us know. www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. As always, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Let us know what albums you'd like to see us review on this YouTube channel. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.
When I don't do the dishes, I throw them in.